Our next speaker is Kevin Upstromm, and for 16 to 17 days a month, his employer is foolish enough to hand him the keys to a 900,000-pound 747 cargo airplane and insists that he fly it around the world, whether it's cattle into Kyrgyzstan, Barbie dolls and Swiffers out of Hong Kong, bombs and bullets into Afghanistan, or toilet paper and tampons into torn-worn Tel Aviv. It's all in a day's work for a freight dog. Here are 19 people that Kevin encountered along the way. So fasten your seatbelts. We are clear for takeoff.
Good evening, everyone. To quote Mel Brooks, work, 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 work. I was asked to include at least one slide showing what I do for a living, and if a picture is worth 1,000 words, that's going to save me a lot of time. It's an hour of boredom, interrupted by moments of terror. And traveling at 8/10 the speed of sound, we find ourselves in a pub in Amsterdam. And it took me 3 Heinekens to get up enough courage to ask these ladies if I could take their picture, which might account for the slight out of focus that you might see there. I love the details in the background, and it was a bit of a tough shot because of the low light. Dude, where's my car? You get the idea that the little girl knows more about where they are than the mother does. Mom, we're right here. It's easy to get turned around in Amsterdam with all the concentric canals and whatnot. Now we're down the road in Liège, Belgium. It's kind of a wet and dreary day. And the thing I like about this image is the ladies in the bakery window, they are not the least bit impressed with the lady with the fur coat. And if you listen real carefully, you can hear them gossiping in the background. This is also in Liège, and the accordion seems to be the instrument of choice for all the street musicians in Europe. I don't know why, but I finally figured it out because a piano is too hard to lug around. I asked him if he knew Free Bird, and that's the expression I got. There are so many interesting things to see and smell in the souk in Bahrain. Testing. Are we up? I'll talk loud. And you can find pretty much anything you want in the souk, and there's tobacco, cooking utensils. Check. There we go. And this little girl here, she just came from school. We'll always have Paris. This is in the Tuileries Gardens in Paris. And these little children are floating their boats in the fountain. And when I first saw them, I thought they were radio controlled. Not the children, the boats. And I think the lady in the background adds a little element to the photograph. This pretty girl was in the old French section of Dakar, Senegal, and she may be 12 or 13 years old, but her eyes are older than what she appears. And she had some little children around her, and they always like to see their picture on the back of my camera when I shoot it. This is one of my favorites. That little girl is completely at peace in her mother's arms, in spite of all the chaos and noise in the streets of Kowloon, and I like being able to see the mother's eye just above the girl's head there. It adds something to it. In 2011, Bahrain experienced its own Arab Spring, and under the thinly veiled guise of a freelance photojournalist, I went and attended several of the protests, and there's a whole lot more to this narrative than 20 seconds I can talk about, and maybe a future presentation. On the way back to the hotel, about 1 o'clock in the morning, after a couple of pints, I came across this gentleman here, spending the night on the street in Belgium. And homelessness is a global problem. And this was kind of a tough shot because of the low light and the long shutter speed. This is more homelessness. And this unfortunate fella, he can be found at the ferry terminal in Hong Kong. And the popo, they'll run him off for a while, but a few hours later, he'll be back pretty much the same place later in the day. About the only word I can use to describe this photograph here is despair. This was taken on Hong Kong Island on one of the narrow streets that are on the island itself. And it looks like she's just been beaten down and has had a tough life, and she's just pretty much at her end of her tether. I like this shot here of this gentleman praying at a mosque in Bahrain. Shooting through the decorative wall kind of makes a nice composition. And I've been invited into many mosques around the world, and everybody's treated me with respect and kindness. This is at the Jade Buddha Temple in Shanghai, and I think the one monk looking back at me kind of adds an element of emotion to the photograph. The temples are serene and peaceful, and I really enjoy going to them. I've been to the Western Wall in Jerusalem many times, and this gentleman, he's always there, and same place every time. And I saw a program on television, and there he was. I don't know. And the little rolled up bits of paper you see in between the wall, those are prayers left by visitors such as myself. I call this one Sleep on the Job. This is a merchant in Bahrain. And sometimes I'll take a picture and I'll come home and print a 5x7. If I go back there the next time, I'll hand it to the fella. And when I showed it to all his friends, he just thought it was hilarious. Speaking of hilarious, I came across this gentleman, this very intoxicated gentleman, on one of the islands that surround Hong Kong. And for some reason, this guy was enamored with Paul Newman. And I think the only words of English he knew were, "Paul Newman, #1." And the islands are peaceful, there's no cars. This is one of my all-time favorites that I've ever taken. This old woman, she sells boxes of tissue outside of a mosque in Bahrain. And I think her eyes and her face are just super expressive. And I've spoken with her a number of times since I've taken this photograph, and she never fails to ask me, "How's your family?" Of the thousands and thousands of photographs I've taken, to me, this is my best and most poignant. I think the dichotomy between the old gentleman and what's behind him in the background just speaks volumes. I often wonder about his backstory. Well, thanks for flying with me today. You're free to move about the cabin.
Thank you, Kevin. I loved all the pictures, but I have to say that I am very partial to the one that you took in Dakar, Senegal, because that's where I grew up. So it's really cool.